Hi, and thank you for joining the Tony Tonkin Show, the place where facts matter because you matter. The primary issue I'm going to talk about in this particular video is in relation to Hamas and uh, and the IDF and Israel. Now, the reason why I'm going to talk about this now is that I just did a post on historical perspectives on Hamas, how horrible as an organization, as a terrorist group they have been, the horrible things they did on October the 7th. And I also did, at the end of that, the peace plan, according to Trump and Netanyahu. But what I am concerned about is the conflation of the notion that if you support uh, the Palestinians in Gaza and you're not supportive of the IDF and what they're doing in Gaza, you are then somehow seen as anti Semitic. And I find that a repulsive notion and don't accept it at all. So I was interested when so something prompted me to do this video on Hamas, and that was that I wanted to identify specifically the issues that are Hamas and the horrible things that they've done, and how they sit as a organisation that shows completely disrespect to the people whom they're supposed to govern, which are the Palestinian people. And also, I think it was important to highlight that they had also done some incredible social changes within Gaza, as limiting as those opportunities would have been, given the restrictions placed upon them and the fact that Gaza is basically an outdoor prison, they did pretty well in that sense. So they're a kind of a contradiction, Hamas are, in some bizarre ways. But I was interested particularly in Chris Kenny's latest piece, which I thought I'd play for you and highlight those differences that I see in terms of the way we identify what is happening in Gaza and how we must, according to people like Kenny, focus just on October the 7th. And because it's the anniversary of October the 7th, as horrible as that was, that needs to be our focus, regardless of what has happened in the following 2 years. That somehow we must forget, not acknowledge, what is happening to the Palestinian people as a result of what the IDF have done. Now, we can have arguments about whether there were tunnels under the hospitals, whether Hamas had human shields. We can argue all those things, and to some extent, they're probably true. So I'm not here to deny that any of those things happened. What I am here to do today is to challenge the type of views that are put forward by my friend Chris Kenny. And here it is.
So many stories of pain and suffering and of brutality and horror and of survival and hope from October the 7th, 2023. For me, the images of murder and mutilation, of cold-hearted, even gleeful slaughter.
When he started to talk about this, I thought, oh my God, Chris is going to break into what's happening in Gaza following October the 7th. And I was about to celebrate Chris as doing something that I thought was really positive, but oh no, guess what he's focusing on?
Of innocence, the terror of the victims. Well, I'll never be able to erase them from my mind. I've seen too much of this. So to think of the scars on those who have lived through it, the survivors, well, I can't conceive of the burden they carry.
And this is the point. The point is that, okay, what those people suffered, and Chris comes up with some examples of the horrible things that people went through on October the 7th. No one's disputing that. No one should dispute it. It was terrible. People lost their lives, and kids, as he talks about later, were traumatized. But does that exclude what happened or what has happened and what continues to happen in Gaza today? Does it alter the fact that yesterday 120 odd people died? Does it change that fact that there are many children who are now orphaned, that there are children who have lost their limbs because of the explosions and because of the onslaught that the IDF have issued upon Gaza? What concerns me is that from people like Chris Kenny, there's no consideration. There's a tacit approach to whatever's happened in Gaza. And even though I understand that October the 7th was about remembering what happened and what Hamas did, there still needs to be that balance between what Hamas did on October the 7th, 1,200 people killed, the 250 people that were captured or whatever. That is important. No one's disputing any of that. I accept that Hamas is a cruel terrorist organisation. But then one has to look at what followed. And as I've said many times before, the proportionality in relation to all of that.
But the life-changing realisation for me is not so much the grotesque barbarity and the death cult mentality of this Islamist terrorism. I've got a good understanding of that dismal ideology through years in foreign affairs. I went to Bali after the bombings of 2002 and after the second Bali bombing in 2005. I headed to Jakarta after the Australian Embassy bombing in 2004. I've been to Iraq, Afghanistan and Iran, to Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the Emirates, Kuwait and Israel, always speaking to experts, Muslim and non-Muslim, to get briefings about this scourge. Then I was one of the last to leave the Lint Cafe in Martin Place before that horror unfolded. So I know the threat that Islamist extremism poses. And I think way too many people in the West don't comprehend it. And I get that. It's not a mindset that we can identify with easily. We value life above all else. The Islamist extremist cult glorifies death and martyrdom. We've seen parents publicly celebrate the so-called martyrdom of their children as suicide bombers.
And yet we see this notion, particularly from the United States, around patriotism and the loss of life that has occurred as a result of their invasion on countries like Iraq. And I fail to see the difference between an incredible power like the United States, and in this case, Israel, pursuing particularly defenseless civilians. Now, in Iraq, 200,000 innocent people died. In Gaza, some 60,000 plus people have died, mainly women and children. And yet we don't seem to understand that the West may not have the same religious fervour in terms of the reason for fighting, but there is a patriotic need, it seems to me, to fight just as aggressively and in such brutal ways as we saw around, Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Gaza, and that somehow that brutality is dismissed. We don't recognise in the West that we are, in many ways, just as brutal as some of these organisations that we hold to account. For example, what's happening in Gaza and Hamas's involvement in that.
Just contemplate that for a moment. But since October the 7th, I've been staggered by how many in the West, in politics, in public debate, and in the media, have overlooked this reality and adopted an entirely political position, an anti-Israel position.
And you can't tell me for one moment that Sky News haven't adopted a political position, regardless of the number of people that have died in Gaza, number of innocent people that have died.
Therefore, they've almost excused the atrocities of October the 7th, or at least portrayed them as part of a political struggle for Palestinian statehood. They've missed the point.
No, to say, as terrible as it is, Chris, actually, that is the point.
And they've twisted reality in order to suit their agenda. It's not as if we didn't know this would happen. In my first program after the October the 7th atrocities, just 2 days later, I said that you wait, soon Israel will get more criticism than Hamas.
Because I think we must remember that this was an event that happened in one day. It was, look, I keep saying it was horrible. There's no excuse for what Hamas had done. They're a terrorist organisation, end of story. That was one day. And they took hostages, they killed people. The reason why and I don't know why people like Chris Kenny and others don't get it. It displays an ignorance that I just fail to understand. That the reality is that so many innocent people following that day died unnecessarily. There were things that Netanyahu government could have done that would have resolved the issue. Like they could have just stopped bombing the shit out of the place. That would have been a good start. And they could have sat down and negotiated some sort of settlement that would have ended the war and the slaughter. But the reality is, and the reason why this becomes political, Chris, is that it is obvious that that isn't what Netanyahu and the right wing of the Israeli government want. And the reason why this becomes so, you make it so political, is that you choose to divide people into Jews and non-Jews as a result of what a government has done, not what the Jewish people have done. And therefore, you escalate the anti-Semitism in this country because of your views. People like myself are out there saying, well, I'm not anti-Semitic at all. And there are many people out there who will view what Israel has done as horrible, as a genocide. But we're not blaming the Jews for that. We aren't. We're blaming Israel for that. There is a difference. But you guys on Sky News want to insist that this is a problem for the Jewish people. And it isn't. It's a problem for a government, an Israeli government, to deal with. And our condemnation is around the government, not Jewish people. That is wrong. But you guys are hyperacting all of that. And I think it needs to be called out. So let me know what you think about all of that. Subscribe to my channel, ring the bell, criticise Chris Kenny for being a clown. Feel free. And let me know what you think, obviously, in the comment section below. Take care, everybody.